You turn the key, and nothing happens. No hum, no vibration. Just a silence so heavy, it almost echoes. If you've ever sat there staring at the dashboard lights, praying for one more crank, you know that sinking feeling. You start thinking, it's over. The engine's dead. You imagine the tow truck, the waiting, the repair bill that could hit your wallet like a hammer. But what if I told you, in most cases, your engine isn't dead at all? It's not broken, it's blocked. Every single day, tens of thousands of drivers pay hundreds of dollars to fix something they could have solved themselves in minutes if they'd just known where to look. I've seen it. I've lived it. And I've saved people from that same nightmare time and time again. Today, I'll show you exactly what to do when your engine goes silent. Because those few minutes between panic and knowledge are where the real power lie. Not under the hood, but in your head. This isn't theory. These are the field-tested methods used by veteran mechanics, tow truck drivers and car enthusiasts who understand how to bring an engine back to life, even when it looks hopeless. You'll learn what really fails, what's just pretending to fail, and what warning signs you should never ignore. So buckle up, because the difference between being stranded and being in control might just be what you learn in the next few minutes. Part 1, the light test. Your car's cry for help. Picture this. You're alone on a dark road. The engine dies mid-turn. Panic sets in. But before you grab your phone, there's one quick move that can tell you everything. It's called the light test, and it's your first line of defense. Flip on your headlights. Hit the horn once. If your lights are weak or the horn sounds tired, your battery is either DOS or disconnected. If they're bright and loud, but the engine won't crank, then the problem isn't your battery. It's something blocking the power. That's your car's first message. And it's one of the simplest, most powerful diagnostic tricks that even professional mechanics use. Why does it matter? Because voltage is the heartbeat of your car. Without stable voltage, even the most expensive modern engines can't run. And when that power starts dropping, every system, from your starter to your computer, begins to panic. I once stopped to help a driver on the interstate shoulder. His hazard lights were flickering like a dying candle, and his phone battery was about to give out. He told me, "I think my alternator's gone." But when I looked closer, the problem was much smaller and cheaper. We flipped his headlights on. They glowed for a second, then dimmed to orange. "Your alternator's fine," I said. "Your connection isn't." Under the hood, the battery clamp was coated in corrosion, white, chalky, and thick. It looked harmless, but it was acting like insulation, cutting off the power flow completely. I cleaned it with a small screwdriver, tightened the clamp, and within seconds, click, roar, hum, the sound of relief. He didn't need a tow truck. He needed 10 seconds of awareness. So here's your first takeaway. When your car won't start, don't guess, don't panic. Let the light test be your first move. Your car's trying to tell you what's wrong. All you have to do is pay attention to the signs. And trust me, ignoring them could leave you stranded in a far worse situation. Because when your battery connection goes weak, your headlights dim first, but your brake lights are next. And when they go out on a dark highway, that silence could turn dangerous, fast. Part 2, the hidden killer. Loose battery terminals. Now, if your lights look strong, but your car still refuses to turn over, here's where most people go wrong. They assume it's the starter, the alternator, or even the ignition switch. But 9 times out of 10, it's something so simple and so overlooked that it catches even experienced drivers off guard. A loose or corroded battery terminal. That tiny connection point between your cable and the battery post is the gatekeeper of your entire electrical system. When it's loose, oxidized, or vibrating, it breaks the circuit in milliseconds, and your car just dies. Here's how it happens. Each time you hit a pothole, brake hard, or drive over rough roads, the vibration slowly loosens the clamps. Add a little moisture, humidity, or salty air, and corrosion forms inside where you can't even see it. Your car will start perfectly fine in the morning, and then hours later, click, silence, panic. I've seen this exact problem cost people hundreds in unnecessary repairs. One woman had her SUV towed to a repair shop, convinced her starter had failed. The mechanic cleaned her terminals, tightened one bolt, and charged her $150. That same fix she could have done herself in 2 minutes. So here's what you do. Pop the hood. Grab each battery cable firmly. Try twisting it. If one moves even slightly, tighten it. And if you see a powdery white or green residue on the clamp, that's corrosion. It acts like rubber between the metal, blocking current flow. Scrape it off with a coin, a key, or the edge of a screwdriver. You don't need a fancy tool. You just need a clean surface for electricity to flow. You'd be amazed how many so-called dead cars come back to life after this one move. But here's where the warning comes in. If you ignore a loose terminal long enough, the problem doesn't just stop at not starting. That weak connection causes electrical surges. It stresses your alternator, fries your battery, and in rare cases, can even start an electrical fire. So if your car occasionally struggles to start, lights flicker while idling, or your dashboard randomly resets, don't wait. Pop the hood, check your terminals, because the fix is cheaper than a coffee, and the damage from ignoring it can cost you an engine. I've rescued stranded travelers, delivery drivers, even police officers, all because one lesson that's as true today as it was 50 years ago. Electricity is simple. It needs a complete path. Break that path, and your car stops breathing. So before you blame the starter or call a tow truck, check the Lifeline first, your battery connection. It's a fix that saved me hundreds of times, and it might just save you next. Part 3, the secret ground path. If your battery terminals are tight and clean but the engine still gives you nothing more than a single click, the next suspect hides just below your sight. The ground path. Every electrical system in your car relies on a complete circuit, and the ground wire is what closes that loop. Without it, electricity has nowhere to go. You can have a brand new battery, fresh terminals, even a perfect starter, and still get silence. I remember helping a friend late one night outside a diner. His truck lights were blazing bright, but the starter refused to spin. He'd already swapped the battery, thinking that was the problem. I noticed something small. The heavy black ground cable running from the battery to the engine block looked dusty and stiff. I gave it a tug, and it snapped in half, corroded clean through inside the insulation. That's all it takes. One broken link, and the current can't complete the loop. When that happens, the power that should be turning your starter motor simply dies on arrival. The fix can be beautifully simple. Take one end of a jumper cable, clamp it onto the negative battery post, and connect the other end to a solid metal part of the engine. A bracket or bolt head will do. Try starting again. If the car suddenly roars to life, you've just proven your ground connection is shot. Many drivers don't realize that bad grounds can cause more than just no-start conditions. They create a cascade of strange symptoms: dim lights, flickering dashboard displays, even false sensor readings that make your car act haunted. And while the temporary jumper trick gets you home, replacing that ground strap permanently is what keeps your electrical system healthy. It's one of those invisible fixes that no one sees but every working mechanic swears by. Part 4, the tap-to-wake starter trick. Now imagine this. You turn the key and hear just one sharp click over and over. Your lights stay strong, your battery's good, and yet the engine won't even try to spin. You're not hearing failure, you're hearing a stuck starter motor. Inside that small cylinder under your engine, carbon brushes carry current to the motor's spinning armature. Over time, dust, wear, or a single rough jolt can make those brushes stick. And that's where the oldest roadside magic trick still works. A tap in the right place. All you need is something with a little weight, a small hammer, a tire iron, even the handle of a wrench. Have someone hold the key in the start position while you reach under carefully and give the starter body 2 or 3 firm taps. Don't smash it, just sharp, confident strikes. The vibration can free the brushes, letting the motor spin, and suddenly your car breathes again. I once helped a woman stranded at a gas station who thought her brand new battery was defective. I crawled under with a small mallet, gave the starter 4 hits, and the engine fired. Like nothing had ever happened. She stared like she'd just seen witchcraft. But it's not magic, it's pure mechanics. Diagnostics show roughly a third of dead starters can be revived temporarily with that method. Of course, it's not permanent. A starter that sticks once will likely stick again. But it can get you off a deserted highway or out of a dark parking lot at midnight without waiting hours for a tow truck. Just remember, if you ever use this trick, do it safely. Set the parking brake, keep the transmission in park or neutral, and make sure you know exactly where the starter sits before crawling under. One moment of caution is worth more than any shortcut. Part 5, the neutral or clutch switch rescue. Sometimes, though, the engine doesn't even give you a click. No sound, no relay, nothing. You twist the key and wonder if the car has simply given up. But there's another hidden culprit, a small safety switch designed to protect you, which sometimes protects a little too well. In automatic transmissions, it's called a park neutral safety switch. In manuals, it's the clutch to interlock. Their job is to make sure you can only start the car in park, neutral, or with the clutch fully pressed. But as cars age, those switches wear, drift out of alignment, or get dirty inside, leaving you with the perfectly healthy engine that simply won't receive the signal to start. I've seen drivers ready to call roadside service thinking their starter was gone, when all they needed was to move the gear selector. If you're in an automatic, hold the brake, shift into neutral, and try again. Sometimes just nudging the lever forward and back while holding the key in start is enough to reconnect the switch. For manual drivers, press the clutch pedal all the way down, even past where it feels comfortable, and try again. Pump it twice, hold it to the floor, and you might hear the starter wake up instantly. It's a strange feeling when the engine finally catches after all that silence, relief mixed with disbelief. But that's how fragile these little switches can be. And here's the warning. A faulty safety switch isn't just inconvenient, it's a hazard waiting to happen. If it fails completely, your car could refuse to start in an emergency, or worse, lurch unexpectedly if the circuit misfires. So once you get home, have it inspected or replaced. Every modern vehicle hides layers of protection meant to keep us safe, but when those systems get old, they sometimes protect us from our own convenience. Learning how to work with them, not against them, is what separates stranded drivers from smart troubleshooters. Part 6, the fuel pump wake-up call. Picture this. You're at a red light. Your engine suddenly coughs once and dies. You turn the key again. It cranks beautifully, but it just won't start. You don't hear a sputter, not even a single fire. That's the sound of an engine starved of fuel, and the most common reason is a silent fuel pump. Every time you turn your key to the on position, a small electric pump hidden inside your fuel tank should hum softly for 2 seconds. That faint buzz is the sound of pressure building in the fuel lines, ready to feed the injectors. If that sound's gone, your pump may be stuck, not dead, just jammed. Here's the fix that saved countless drivers. While a helper turns the key, crawl beside the rear wheel and give the bottom of your fuel tank 3 or 4 firm knocks with your fist or a rubber mallet. You're not trying to dent it, just wake it up. Inside the pump is a small motor with carbon brushes that sometimes stick when hot or worn. The vibration shocks them free, allowing the motor to spin again. I learned this trick the hard way on a deserted highway years ago. My truck died just after sunset. No phone signal, no service stations. I remembered an old tow driver's tip: bang the tank. 3 solid hits later, I heard that faint hum again. I turned the key, and the engine roared back to life. I made it home with a smile and a mental note to change that pump the next morning. This isn't a permanent fix, but it's a lifesaver. Once you get it running, drive straight to safety. A pump that sticks once will fail completely soon after. Replace it before it strands you in a worse place. Part 7. The Fuse and Relay Lifeline. If your pump doesn't wake up or your engine suddenly dies for no reason, don't overlook the simplest heroes under your hood, the fuses and relays. In that small plastic box beside the battery live dozens of tiny switches that control nearly everything in your car. When one of them burns or sticks, power stops flowing to vital systems like the fuel pump, ignition coils, or engine computer. Most drivers ignore this box, but a quick check here can save you hours. Open it carefully and press each fuse down with your thumb. Vibrations and temperature changes can work them loose over time. I once fixed a no start in a parking lot just by pushing down a single fuse that had backed out halfway. The driver had been waiting 3 hours for a tow. Next, look at the relays, those small gray or black cubes. They act like gates that open and close circuits under high current. Swap the fuel pump relay with another one that has the same part number, like the horn or AC relay. Then try starting again. If it fires right up, congratulations. You just diagnosed a bad relay without spending a dime. I've seen this exact scenario dozens of times. A driver will swear his car is cursed. It starts one day, dies the next. But the culprit was just a tired relay that decided to nap. These little boxes may cost less than a coffee, yet when they fail, they can mimic a catastrophic breakdown. Here's a small warning most people don't realize. Never poke around your fuse box with metal tools. Use your fingers or a plastic fuse puller. One short spark in the wrong place can fry your car's computer, and that's a much pricier story. So remember, before you assume the worst, look for the simplest gatekeepers. Because sometimes salvation hides under a plastic lid the size of your hand. Part 8. The Inertia Switch Reset. When safety shuts you down. You've checked the fuses, the relays, even the tank, and still no fuel pump noise, no ignition. Now here's a hidden secret built into many cars, especially Fords, Volvos, and some older Mazdas. A tiny device called the Inertia Fuel Cutoff Switch. Its job is to cut off fuel instantly during a collision to prevent fires. The problem? Sometimes it triggers when you hit a deep pothole, slam a door, or even get rear-ended at low speed. I once got a call from a family stuck at a rest stop. The car had stalled after hitting a rough patch of road. Everything worked. Lights, battery, starter, but the engine refused to fire. The fuel pump was silent. I knew right away what to check. I walked to the passenger footwell, peeled back the carpet, and there it was. A little red button on top of the inertia switch. I pressed it once. Click. The driver turned the key, and the engine sprang back to life. He stared like I'd performed a miracle, but it was just basic knowledge. This switch is your car's invisible guardian, and sometimes it's a little too cautious. If your car has suddenly lost power after a sharp jolt, look in your owner's manual for its location. In some models, it's in the trunk or behind a side panel. Pressing that small reset button reconnects the circuit and allows the fuel pump to run again. But let this serve as a reminder. If the switch trips easily, have your suspension checked. Cars that jolt hard enough to trigger safety sensors might have worn shocks or mounts, and ignoring that could lead to more than just inconvenience next time. The inertia switch may be a tiny component, but it teaches a big lesson. Your car is designed to protect you, not just move you. Sometimes, understanding that balance between safety and function is key to getting back on the road without fear. Part 9. The Flood Clear Mode. Drying out a drowned engine. There's a very distinct smell that every mechanic knows. The heavy, sharp scent of raw gasoline after too many failed start attempts. It's the scent of an engine that's drowning in its own fuel. We call it flooding, and when it happens, even a perfectly healthy engine will refuse to start. Picture this. You're stuck in a parking lot. The car cranks over and over, sputters once, almost catches, then nothing. You try again, still nothing. Each time you crank, you're dumping more fuel into the cylinders until the spark plugs are soaked and can't ignite anything. Here's the fix that almost nobody remembers anymore. The flood clear mode. Press the accelerator all the way to the floor. Yes, floor it, and hold it there while you turn the key. Keep cranking for about 10 seconds. Don't worry, you're not giving it more gas. You're actually telling your car's computer to cut the fuel injection entirely. The wide-open throttle floods the engine with fresh air, clearing the excess gas inside. I once showed this trick to a panicked driver at a grocery store parking lot. She said she'd tried starting her car 20 times, convinced the fuel pump had failed. I told her, hold the pedal down. Don't let go until I say. 10 seconds later, the car coughed. Once, twice, then started, cleanly like nothing had happened. She stared at me, shocked. That's all it needed? She asked. Yep, that's it. Here's the science behind it. When the engine control unit detects the accelerator, pressed to the floor during cranking, it stops sending fuel to the injectors, allowing the spark plugs to dry and the air-fuel mix to balance out again. Within moments, your engine has the right ratio to ignite properly. So if your car smells like gasoline and refuses to start, don't keep cranking aimlessly. Take a deep breath, press that pedal to the floor, and trust the system your engineer built for exactly this moment. It's an old trick, but it's saved thousands of frustrated drivers. Part 10. The Air Filter Rescue. When your engine can't breathe. Now imagine this. Your car turns over, starts for a second, and then dies immediately. You try again? Same thing? It feels like fuel or spark, but the truth might be even simpler. Your engine can't breathe. Most people forget that air is just as vital to combustion as fuel or spark. Without the right airflow, your car simply chokes itself out. And sometimes, the culprit isn't mechanical failure, it's just a clogged air filter. This happens more often than you think, especially after driving through heavy dust, pollen, or even rainstorms. I once saw a car die completely after driving through a desert dust storm. When we opened the airbox, the filter looked like it had been dipped in cement, completely sealed off. Here's what you can do if you're stranded and suspect your car can't breathe. Pop the hood, find your air filter housing, usually a black plastic box connected to a large hose. Unclip it, lift out the filter, and take a look. If it's visibly clogged with dust or mud, set it aside for now. Reattach the cover and try starting the car without the filter in place. You might be surprised when the engine fires right up. That's because it's finally getting the oxygen it needs. This is a temporary solution. Driving without a filter means dust and debris can enter the engine, which is harmful long-term. But in an emergency, it's the difference between being stranded and getting to safety. So if your engine dies suddenly after a long drive through rough conditions, don't just assume it's fuel or ignition. Sometimes, the problem is as simple as a breath your car can't take. Part 11. The Starting Fluid Test. The truth serum for your engine. You've checked power. You've got cranking. But the engine still refuses to fire. Now it's time for a little detective work, and one small can that can tell you everything in seconds. Starting fluid. This test is as old school as it gets, but it's still one of the most accurate diagnostic moves out there. It doesn't fix the problem, but it tells you instantly where to look next, whether it's fuel, spark, or compression. Here's how it works. Remove the intake hose connected to your air filter box, exposing the throttle body. Have someone turn the key while you give the throttle, opening a quick 1-second burst of starting fluid. If the engine fires briefly and then dies, you've just proven it's a fuel delivery issue. The injectors aren't getting gas, or the pump isn't building pressure. But if the engine doesn't fire at all, that points to an ignition or mechanical issue, like bad coils, timing problems, or even a failed crank sensor. I once used this exact test on a stranded minivan outside a rest area. The driver had replaced both the battery and the starter, still no luck. I sprayed a short puff of fluid into the throttle body, told him to crank, and the engine came to life for 3 seconds before dying again. "It's your fuel pump," I said. He didn't believe me. But when we tested pressure later, it read 0. 160 pump later, the van was running perfectly. Starting fluid isn't about brute force, it's about answers. It isolates the problem, so you can stop guessing and start acting. But here's a warning. Use it carefully. A little goes a long way. Too much can cause backfire or even damage the engine. A single short spray is all you need. When used right, this trick can turn a confusing mystery into a clear plan of action. It's the moment when frustration turns into confidence, because you finally know what your car's been trying to tell you all along. Part 12, the ECU Reset. When your car's brain gets confused. In the old days, a car that wouldn't start. It was always mechanical. Fuel, spark, air, compression. But modern cars are different. Today, every system depends on one thing, a computer. Your car's ECU, or engine control unit, is the brain that decides when to spark, how much fuel to inject, and when to idle. But just like any computer, sometimes it crashes. Here's what that looks like. Your car cranks perfectly, but doesn't even try to catch. You might have fuel, spark, and compression, but the computer simply isn't sending the signal to make them work together. It's like having a body with a heartbeat but no pulse rhythm. The good news? You can reboot it. Disconnect your negative battery terminal and leave it off for 60 seconds. While it's disconnected, press your brake pedal once to drain any remaining charge in the system. Then reconnect the cable, tighten it down, and turn the key to the on position. But don't start yet. Wait 30 seconds, then turn it off. Wait another 30 seconds. Now start the engine. This simple sequence clears temporary faults, resets the crank and cam position data, and forces the ECU to relearn from scratch. I've seen it work countless times, especially after for jump start or battery replacement. Once I helped a delivery driver whose van refused to start after a battery swap. We pulled the terminal, waited a minute, and tried again. The engine came to life instantly. It's one of those fixes that feels too simple to believe, but modern ECUs are sensitive. A single electrical surge, a loose ground, or even a drained battery can confuse them. So when everything looks fine but nothing happens, give your car the digital reboot it sometimes needs. And one warning. When you reconnect the power, your idle may fluctuate for a few minutes. That's normal. The computer is relearning air intake and throttle response. Let it run for 5 minutes to settle down before you drive off. Sometimes the smartest move isn't to add more tools, it's to give your car a clean slate. Part 13, the Coil Pack. Shuffle. When spark fails in silence, you've got air, fuel, and the ECU's back online, but the engine still cranks endlessly without firing. If that's you, the problem may lie in one of the most misunderstood systems of all, ignition coils. Modern engines no longer rely on one central coil and distributor. Instead, each cylinder has its own small coil sitting directly on top of the spark plug. It's brilliant for efficiency, until one coil fails. Then you're running on fewer cylinders. And in some cars, the computer won't even allow the engine to start until it detects a stable ignition signal. Here's how you can test it, even on the side of the road. Pull off the plastic cover over your engine, and you'll see a row of identical coils, usually black, pencil-shaped, with a small connector at the top. Unplug one, swap it with another cylinder, and reconnect both. If the engine tries to start, or the misfire changes, you've found your culprit. I once had a customer who swore his car had completely died. I swapped his coil from cylinder 3 to cylinder 1, and suddenly the car started, running rough but alive. He couldn't believe that a $45 part had left him stranded for hours. The lesson? A single faulty coil can make your car act like the engine's gone. And worse, If you keep trying to start it, unburned fuel from that dead cylinder will flood into your catalytic converter, a 900 mistake. If you ever find the dead coil, unplug its injector to stop the fuel flow until you can replace it. That trick alone can save you from serious damage. The beauty of modern coil systems is that they're modular. You can swap, test, and isolate the issue in minutes. It's one of the simplest ways to bring life back to an engine that refuses to wake up. Part 14, the timing scare. When your engine spins too fast. There's a distinct sound that makes every experienced mechanic's stomach tighten. An engine that cranks too fast. No resistance, no rhythm, just a hollow whir that means one thing: no compression. And when there's no compression, your timing belt or chain may have jumped, or worse, broken entirely. The timing belt is what synchronizes your crankshaft and camshaft, the motion of the pistons and the opening of the valves. If it slips or snaps, those two parts go out of sync, and in many engines, that means the valves and pistons collide. In a split second, your car can go from not starting to catastrophic engine damage. If you ever turn the key and notice the cranking sounds lighter, faster, and eerily smooth, stop immediately. Don't keep trying. Pull the upper cover off your timing belt if you can, or look through the small inspection window near the crank pulley. If you see the belt missing, frayed, or not moving while the engine cranks, that's your answer. I once saw a customer keep cranking his sedan after a timing belt failure, hoping it would catch. Every attempt bent another valve. By the time he stopped, the repair bill had tripled. The good news is that some engines called non-interference engines can survive a belt, jump, or a break without internal damage. If you're lucky enough to have one, you can sometimes realign the timing yourself, or with a mechanic's help. But for most cars today, timing failure is serious business. Here's the warning I give everyone. If your engine suddenly dies while driving, especially with no warning lights or sputter, don't try restarting it over and over. Pop the hood, listen carefully, and feel the rhythm. A missing or slipped timing belt has a unique signature: smooth but empty, fast but lifeless. That's not an engine you can restart. That's one that needs careful hands before you make things worse. Sometimes knowing when not to start is the smartest move you can make. Part 15. The diesel flood fix. When pressure turns against you, gasoline engines and diesel engines may sound similar when they won't start, but what's happening inside them is entirely different. Diesel engines don't use spark plugs. They rely on high compression and heat to ignite the fuel. That means when something goes wrong and too much fuel gets trapped inside the cylinders, it's not just flooded, it's hydrolocked. I once got a call from a farmer out in the countryside whose old Ford diesel pickup wouldn't start no matter what he tried. The starter strained, the engine barely moved, and he thought the motor had seized completely. When I arrived, I noticed the smell: heavy diesel vapors and wet soot from the exhaust. That wasn't a dead engine, it was flooded solid. Here's the reality. When diesel injectors leak or overfuel during repeated start attempts, liquid fuel fills the combustion chamber. But diesel doesn't compress, unless like air. When the piston rises and meets a wall of liquid fuel, something has to give. And that something is often a connecting rod or a valve. That's why you must never keep cranking a diesel that sounds locked up. The fix isn't pretty, but it works. You'll need to remove the glow plugs, those small heating elements that sit in the top of each cylinder, or in some cases, the injectors. Once they're out, turn the key and crank the engine briefly. Fuel will spray out like a geyser, sometimes several feet into the air. Keep cranking until it stops. Then reinstall the plugs. Wait a few minutes to let any vapor settle, and try again. The farmer watched in disbelief as diesel mist shot out of his engine like a pressure washer. But once we cleared it, the old truck roared back to life, coughing and sputtering like it was catching its breath after a long dive underwater. Here's the takeaway. Diesel flooding isn't rare. It just hides behind symptoms that look mechanical. If you ever feel that heavy resistance in your starter, stop immediately and clear the cylinders. It might look messy, but it's a small price to pay compared to rebuilding an engine. Part 16, the push start trick, borrowing momentum. Sometimes all you need to restart engine is movement, raw mechanical motion. If your car has a manual transmission and the battery's dead or the starter's given up, you can use the oldest, most reliable trick in the book, the push start. It's simple in principle, but feels like magic the first time you pull it off. Here's how it works. Your car's momentum replaces the starter motor. When the wheels turn, they spin the engine through the transmission. If you've got fuel, compression, and spark, the engine will ignite, even with a completely dead battery. I learned this trick as a teenager when my old pickup refused to start in the middle of nowhere. No jumper cables, no cell signal, just an empty dirt road. I got out, pushed until I built up speed, jumped back in, dropped it into second gear, and popped the clutch. The rear wheels locked for a split second, the engine coughed, then came to life. That sound, that sudden raw roar, is something you never forget. Here's how you do it safely. Turn the key to on. Depress the clutch and shift into second gear. Not first, because you'll get a smoother engagement. Start rolling, either downhill or with a push from a friend. When you hit about 5 to 10 miles per hour, release the clutch quickly while giving a little throttle. The car might jerk once or twice, but if everything's right, the engine will fire. It's an incredible feeling when you hear it catch, a reminder that sometimes motion itself is all the energy you need. But remember, once it's running, don't shut it off until you're safely home or near help. That battery won't recharge if the alternator's dead, and if you stop, you'll be right, back where you started. The push start trick doesn't just start cars. It starts confidence. It reminds you that even without electricity, pure mechanics still have your back. Part 17, the Tau Start Lifeline. When you've got help on the road. Now imagine you're stranded on an empty stretch of highway. Your starter's dead and there's no hill to roll down. If you're lucky enough to have another vehicle around, there's one last resort technique that's rescued stranded drivers for nearly a century: the tow start. It's the same principle as a push start, but instead of muscle, you use another vehicle's power to spin your engine. Connect a proper tow strap between the two cars. Never use a rope. They can snap dangerously. Keep it short, around 10 to 15 feet, so the pull is steady. Now, with your ignition on and the transmission in second gear, signal your partner to begin pulling gently. As your car gains speed, around 15 to 20 miles per hour, release the clutch quickly. If the engine has spark and fuel, it will catch instantly. Once it fires, press the clutch back in, give a quick rev, and flash your lights to signal success. Then, don't forget to take it out of gear before slowing down. I've used this trick twice in my life, both in remote places where there were no mechanics for miles. Once was on a back road in Montana, where my truck's starter had died after a long off-road climb. A passing Jeep offered a tow. We rolled downhill, hit 20 miles per hour. I dropped it into second, and the roar that followed was pure relief. This trick can feel risky, and it is. So here's the warning. Always coordinate clearly with your tow driver before starting. Use hand signals or phones to communicate. Keep your steering straight, avoid jerking, and never attempt this on wet, icy, or crowded roads. Tow starting isn't elegant, but it's proof of how resilient engines are when you know what they need. With a bit of teamwork, even a dead car can roar back to life and get you home. Part 18, the calm mind, your greatest tool. If there's one lesson in all of this, it's that engines are logical. They don't break to punish you. They break to communicate. Every silence, every click, every sputter means something. When panic hits, breathe. Check your lights, your power, your air, your fuel, your spark. Every car that wouldn't start in my career, from dusty farm trucks to luxury sedans, had a reason. And once we found it, it always made sense. So the next time your engine refuses to start, don't just call for a tow. Take a moment. Think through what you've learned today. You might surprise yourself with how much control you actually have. Because at the end of the day, knowing your car, truly understanding it, isn't just about saving money. It's about confidence. It's about turning fear into focus. And it's about never being stranded again. You don't need to be a mechanic. You just need to remember that every machine has a rhythm. And once you learn how to bus, listen, even silence starts to make sense. Outro turning panic into power. So what do all these moments have in common? The hammer tap that saved a stranded driver, the fuel tank bang that revived a silent pump, the push start that turned a hopeless evening into a victory. They all began with one thing: calm thinking. When a car fails, panic clouds logic. Your hands shake, your heartbeat races, and every second feels longer than the last. But the truth is, when you understand the system, fear disappears. You stop guessing, and you start diagnosing. You become the kind of driver who doesn't freeze when things go wrong. You act. I've stood beside hundreds of cars that wouldn't start, on mountain roads, in empty parking lots, and even under stormy skies at 2 a.m. And I've watched drivers go from helpless to empowered in minutes once they realized they weren't at the mercy of their machines. That moment, when the engine roars back to life and the headlights glow again, is unforgettable. It's more than relief, it's victory. And maybe that's the lesson buried in every restart story. Your car isn't just a collection of parts. It's a living rhythm of air, fuel, spark, and timing. And once you understand how those four things work together, you'll never be afraid of silence again. Because the next time you turn the key and hear nothing, you won't panic. You'll pause, you'll think, and you'll remember the sound of knowledge replacing fear, the sound of your engine coming back to life because you knew what to do. This isn't just about fixing cars. It's about reclaiming control. Every driver has the power to understand their machine, to read the signs, to react the right way. The secret isn't strength or skill. It's patience, observation, and a little bit of courage. So the next time your engine dies, remember this: violence doesn't mean it's over. It means it's talking, and now you know how to listen. If this guide helped you understand your car better, give this video a like, share it with someone who drives alone often, and subscribe for more real-world knowledge that keeps you confident on the road. Here on Mechanical Wonders, we don't just fix engines, we teach you how to trust them, read them, and keep them alive. Because a calm driver is a powerful one. Stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next video.